Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry it's me again before I'm coming in between you and your coffee break again. Apologies. But I'm sure this panel is worth waiting for. We have two very distinguished guests ready to plunge into the topic of geopolitics. In fact, we met both of them over dinner last night and they were already at it, so I'm hoping they will continue the sparring this morning. So maybe we should start with where Indonesia is in the larger geopolitical environment that we are confronted with today. Indonesia has been very nimble at managing its economic engagements with China, and at the same time, winning friends in the West. What do you attribute this success of Indonesia to, in this ability to walk this fine line, as it were?
Thank you, Zuraida, and thank you very much for having me here, Pak Muhammad and MC. Let me just provide you a bit of context on Indonesia, right? And so it can flavor this discussion. There are what I call seven main points of Indonesia, and maybe five of them is quite obvious. We are the fourth largest country in the world, the biggest economy in Southeast Asia. We straddle both the Indian and the Pacific Ocean. 40% of ASEAN economy is Indonesian economy, $1.5 trillion out of 3.5 total ASEAN. Not only that, Indonesia's archipelago, we have 7 maritime borders, right? In Thailand, India, Australia, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, Malaysia, and the Philippines. So 7 countries we have maritime borders. 3 countries we have terrestrial borders. We have borders with Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, and Timor-Leste. We have the longest maritime border in the world among 2 neighboring countries that are so far apart in terms of history, in terms of race, in terms of religion, with Australia and Indonesia, but yet we're neighbors. You can't find anywhere else in the world where you have 2 countries that have bordering that are so different in race, religion, and history than Indonesia and Australia. And yet we are one of the most, we have a strategic alliance with Australia, and we maintain this, right? Second, I'd like to also point out that Indonesia's diplomatic history, the recent diplomatic history, if you notice that like 25, 26 years ago, Timor-Leste was part of Indonesia. When Timor-Leste became independent, we were the first country to endorse Timor-Leste to be part of ASEAN. Even some of the more advanced ASEAN countries said, well, maybe not. But Indonesia, as a former part of Indonesia, we switched. We supported Timor-Leste in its development. Very few former colonies or former rulers, when that other country became independent, had such a good relationship other than Timor-Leste and Indonesia. So those are very unique characteristics of Indonesia. And so going forward, I think many of the stories that are not said, that was also communicated with Pandu earlier, is that Indonesia needs to tell its story better, right? Indonesia has it in terms of human resource, mineral resources. We're number 5 in cobalt, number 4 in copper, number 1 in gold, and number 2 in batubara or coal. So and the list goes on. So just the context of where Indonesia lies between the great powers. So we come with value, we come with leverage, in my view. Indonesia has always been what we call thought leaders in the region, and not only thought leaders, we are what we call pathfinders. Many of the countries in Southeast Asia look at Indonesia on how we navigate this, this recent global political landscape. So I'll stop there and maybe we'll continue tomorrow.
Mr. Amresi?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. I think that in order to answer this question, I'd like to outline where the world is heading right now, and then see within that how Indonesia is required to fine-tune or calibrate its strategy. So the Indonesia of the past and the Indonesia of the present has been successful. It's the Indonesia of the future that is going to be key. And this is in the context of the US administration that we now see in power in Washington. We see a US president that is very transactional, that is very polarized. It's his way or the highway. Either you are with us or you are against us. And with this trend in the United States, are we going to see the emergence of a sole unipolar hegemon, or are we going to see a multipolar world developing? So I think the jury is still out as to how the world has perceived the incoming Trump administration. So far, it looks like his tactics have been rather accustomed to bullying, and people have to conform as to the US way of life, the US way of trade, whether it is through tariffs, whether it is through sanctions. And so we see a completely new playbook, and it's very early to say how and which middle powers will be successful in navigating through this emerging playbook. I think for Indonesia, it is a very powerful middle power. It is sitting in between two major blocs, China and United States. And a lot will also depend on how China sets itself up and rises to the occasion. Does it want to compete aggressively with the United States, or does it want to continue allowing the US to dictate largely rules and then engage in only areas where it feels that it has to in order to preserve its hegemony? I think that there were two strategies that I saw which I really liked about Indonesia. One is what you call bebas aktif, which is that we want to be free, we want to be independent, but we want to be nonetheless active. And then the management of the rivalry, million friends and no enemies. This is what has held Indonesia in very good stead in the past, and time will tell whether the same doctrines will continue to help Indonesia as the world changes.
Okay, great. So there's a lot to unpack there. Pak Dino, I think Mr. Amasi talked about the US, and as we all know, Indonesia, like many other Southeast Asian countries, in the past year has been caught up in trying to work out a trade deal. And we were told last month that it was going to happen last month. And then in the corridors of this conference, I overheard this morning that it will happen next week. Do you have anything to share with us?
Well, I think the prognosis is progressing, right? And we expect to have, or hope to have a trade deal with the U.S. U.S. remains a big market for us. They're an important economic partner with Indonesia. I think the second largest trading partner after China. But you know, 87% of the world economy is non-U.S. So, you know, you have a U.S. dynamics, but then you have to also understand that the world, the multipolar world, is beginning to evolve in a way that Indonesia is starting to play a major role. What's ironic in this conversation is people like myself and many people in this room, we are all educated in the U.S. or Western countries, right? And I tell them this, right? I said, look, not only that, we send our sons and daughters back to the U.S. So how is it that we are pro-China? But China comes in and makes the investment. They come in and they commit to the policies that we proposed. Take, for example, the coal export ban on nickel, right? The day that the Indonesian government banned export raw nickel and encouraged investment in the smelter plants, the following day, we got sued by the EU. They brought us to court. You know what I said to the business community? Why did you sue us? You don't even buy our nickel. You buy your nickel from African countries, but you're the first guy the first group that brought us to the WTO. And they say, oh yeah, it's because free market. Wait a minute. That's our nickel. We have resource sovereignty over our nickel. And guess what? The same ban on nickel, Chile did the same thing. You didn't sue Chile, but you brought us to court. So there's a degree of, you need to have, in my view, intellectual honesty and look at things and trying to do, and understanding that, there's a whole level of countries that are developing and requiring new triangulation in the relationships within these blocks. And this is just one experience that I've come across.
Right. So actually, talking about the trade deal that's happening, apparently there are no more sticking points. It's a matter of scheduling. That's my understanding. But critics will tell you that, even as you sign the trade deal, your reliance or Indonesia's reliance on China is growing every day to the point that, is there a danger of you being overly reliant on Chinese investors? They are number 2 and number 3. Hong Kong and China are number 2 and number 3 in terms of FDI. Do you think you should be doing more to diversify?
I think there's 3 dimensions to it. Indonesia will always follow their own interest. So in terms of investment and collaboration, it's Indonesia first, right? We're open to partners. And those partners can be the West, can be China, can be Australia, anybody. We're open to partners. So the context of, who is seen to be more active in investment, that's a trend. It goes back and forth. But Indonesia will always follow its own interest first, right? And another context I'd like to point out that the Chinese investment, especially the BRI, we have a couple of BRI investment. And we're careful. I mean, we have the speed train, the first high-speed train in Southeast Asia, Jakarta-Bandung. And we do have other collaborations with other countries. MRT and LRT are I think, Japanese investment. So there is a balance. But I think we need to create our own narrative, an Asia narrative. Let me just triangulate to, for example, just energy transition, the JETP. We've been discussing with the EU on JETP for quite a while. But the transition component that the EU is asking us to do is it's not workable. Because as a developing economy, you need to have, to take price of electricity into account. And this transition can actually increase the price of electricity. So we need to find solutions on our own. AZEC and other solutions is probably more doable because the transition energy takes it into account, for example, gas, LNG, which is actually doable for us. So in the context of Indonesian development, we see things from what we think would be beneficial for us, whether it's investment from Europe, US, China. It just, what can I do? What can I say, right?
You take whatever's good. Talking about you doing what is best for your country, I want to turn to the subject of Indonesia's involvement in the Board of Peace. I think many people were quite curious to see Indonesia being among the first to step up to be willing to pay 1 billion over 3 years. Vietnam is also doing the same, but for Vietnam, the calculation has been, this is the price we pay for the trade deal that we have to make with the US. What are the calculations for Indonesia? Do you actually stand to benefit from membership? Maybe Mr. Amasi first?
Not an expert on Indonesia per se, but I think that in this great power competition, having diversity is very important. Not to be beholden to any one superpower is very important, because once you start to become over-dependent on any one, then they start to call the shots. And so how do you very deftly balance your interests in a way that suits you the best and play the horses for horses game is going to ensure who only survives or who is successful in the end, which is play them against each other for what it is that you want and what it is that they can do for you, rather than follow blind either one or the other, because that is a no-win situation.
Let me just add, I think Indonesia works with the U.S. We're very, it's an important partner in our international relations. But but Indonesia provides a context in its relationships to both China and the U.S. We are the founders of the South-South Corporation back in 1955. And the South-South Corporation, and how we see, is a South-South Corporation that also collaborates with the West. It's not an anti-West, right? And so in the context that we're involved with BRICS, is like that too. We have a South-South Corporation with the BRICS country, that's fine, but it doesn't mean that we're anti-West. We will collaborate with with other countries when we feel that there's benefit for us. And this is also earlier, Erlangga mentioned that we are basically on the path through ascension to OECD, right? Which will provide us a platform for economic advancement. You know, that's another alliance that we felt that it's important for us. And like Muhammad Amersi just said, you know, this Board for Peace is something that we value, and is important for Indonesia to be part of the solution in some of the world challenges and issues. Yeah.
But your domestic constituency hasn't been very happy with your participation in the Board of Peace. What do you have to say about that, Padino?
That's above my pay grade, but I think we'll see what happens. I think there's a lot of other issues that Indonesia is facing. We are in the midst of a change in many of the geopolitical landscape, and that will also put pressure not only on the investment collaboration but also on the supply chain. And so that's why Kadin, as an organization, we are planning to visit China. We are planning to bring in a strong delegation to talk about supply chain and to ensure that whatever changes in the landscape, we're able to manage. That's one of the issues that's being raised. And what our concern is that everything is being weaponized now, right? Even logistics. The cost of sending a container from Germany to Indonesia, for example, there's two routes. You can go through the Suez Canal, or you can go through Africa, South Africa, and to Singapore. Two routes. But one route is heavily insured. And the cost of insurance is so big that it makes the other route more feasible. These are dynamics that we need to manage. And I think that's more important for us to look at that from a business side, on how we can ensure that supply chains remain stable, remain strong in the midst of understanding that everything can be weaponized. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to go back to US-China rivalry, but before that, I think we do need to talk about ASEAN. Where is ASEAN in all these negotiations? Is ASEAN still relevant?
So let me start by saying that you have a number of these blocks, whether it's the Global South, whether it is the Shanghai Cooperation, whether it is ASEAN, and then you have the G7, you have NATO, and United Nations. If you look at what Trump did recently in Davos, I was with him, he marginalized the role of the United Nations by saying that let's now create this Board of Peace that will largely take over some of the political functions that the UN was playing a role in. Today, 95% of what the US owes the United Nations has not been paid, and it's unlikely to be paid sometime soon. So then you have a situation where it's very clear that the larger blocks are not going to really be effective anymore, and it is the smaller blocks that are going to play a powerful role in their backyard. So, for example, whether the AUKUS partnership works, whether the Quad partnership works, whether they are more effective, I think is going to be the key. And the larger blocks, I think, will suffer, because to find alignment in those larger blocks today, when you have people competing very aggressively for scarcity in mineral resources, for human capital, for technological power, is going to be very, very tough. So I think that the smaller blocks will perhaps outperform the larger blocks.
Yeah, I just want to follow up the point. Last year, ASEAN investments is $220 billion. Out of that, among ASEAN countries, only 50 billion, so it's very small. $170 billion among ASEAN countries. And who is the biggest investor last year? US. Who is the second biggest investor? China. ASEAN remains a bright spot among all the other regions. Its growth, cumulative growth is 5%, right? So when you say, is ASEAN relevant? The investment statistics say yes, it's still relevant. The superpowers are still investing in ASEAN. They're looking at businesses in various modes and various collaboration. They're using more imagination. And it remains a bright light in among the other regional blocs, right? So yeah, I mean, to say that ASEAN is relevant in terms of investment and trade, the numbers speak for itself.
Politically, maybe not so much.
My only comment there would be that, again, it's ASEAN in the way it operates today, but whether in the next 12 to 24 months the US administration will allow participation in a bloc which they do not totally control or are not the dominant partner or power is a big question mark that everybody will have to face.
I agree, but the ASEAN trade dynamics is still there. I mean, the U.S. will always be a big part of the ASEAN story, right? Both in investment and trade. But you know, like I said, 90% of the rest of the world trades among each other. And although we really believe America is an important partner of ASEAN, you know, the reality on the ground is that the ASEAN economic development remains a very bright story. And you know, we have collaboration from all over the world. And I think, you know, we have other middle powers. There we have Canada, we have Australia, EU, and in the UK even. And, you know, they might see ASEAN a bit differently. I think the story is between, does the world remain unipolar or multipolar? I happen to be in the view that it's multipolar world. And as a relevant middle power like Indonesia and among ASEAN countries, you know, we value rules-based order. We value international collaboration, and we value our collaboration and friendships around the world, right?
Great. Yeah, a lot of profound views there. But I just want to end very quickly, Pak Dino, with a word from you. I think at the start of the initial years of this so-called US-China geopolitical rivalry, the main mantra that you heard in Southeast Asia was, don't make us choose sides. But it's been more than 5 years. What is the current operating model or the key words going forward for these countries?
Can I start? ASEAN have seen trade with China before, right? Over the last 1,800 years, the Indonesian archipelago itself has been covered with trade. It started with the Indian empires that went to Java, and they established their kingdoms there. The Muslim traders in the Middle East, they came, they traded. Many of them settled in Indonesia. The Chinese dynasties also came about the Middle Ages. They all settled. Many of these communities in Java are 300, 400 years of Chinese settlement. So they've been a part of Indonesia. And the last, of course, civilization was the West, right? So they all came and colonized the West. You know, out of the four civilizations, only one used force. Guess who? So when you look at a rising China from where we're sitting, yeah, I mean, we traded 1,000 years ago. We traded 1400s. Okay, right? The problem with the West, and this I tell this to my friends, is that many of the West owners have seen two hegemonies, the UK and the US, right? Countries that have been in existence for only 200 years, we'll only see two types of major civilization. But civilizations like in Southeast Asia, we've seen China, we've seen India, we've seen other civilizations come across our lands, traded, settled. In my view, I don't see anything different than today's China. China and India dominated the trade for 1,800 years, 1,800 years, right? So my comment is that, and leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, quickly, Mr. Emerson.
The only comment I would make to that is that we are going through a very transformational phase in the world today. Rarely has a superpower decided to assert its force in the way that the United States is doing now. And I think that for middle power countries to survive and thrive, they will have to reassess what they have been doing and seeing how relevant is their strategy today. And you will find that a lot of the rule book by which they were playing is no longer applicable. And countries that will succeed will be the ones that will understand what it will take to navigate in this very new world in which it's not only trade, but trade is going to be linked to issues of security, issues of defense. It's all going to be put in one pot, and people will be told either you take it this way or then you are on your own. So it's going to be only those countries that have got the nimbleness, that have got the strategic mindset to be able to be flexible and to be able to retool themselves, that they are going to succeed. The history books are full of examples of how empires have risen, empires have fallen, but largely nobody today is a match to the United States. I'll give you one example. At last count, the United States had 742 military bases all over the world in some form or shape. The sum total of China, Russia, EU, and the United Kingdom was 46. So this is the disparity you have in global power today. And for the first time, you have a president that is not hypocritical like it has been in the past, where they hide their colors. This is a president that is going to forcefully assert US power and US interests. And it's going to be up to the rest of the world to say, are we going to take sides, or are we somehow still so big that we can get away by playing each one for what we want from them?
Okay, very quickly to summarize, going forward, according to Mr. Amashi, you need to stay nimble, flexible, adapt, stand up to the US. But according to Pak Dino, we've been here before. I think if I could use an Indonesian word, it is tenang, stay calm. We've been through it before. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our wonderful esteemed guests for participating in today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Emerson.